Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to unpack how a company, whose employees genuinely believed their CEO was some kind of messiah, somehow managed to incinerate billions and billions of dollars. We are talking about one of the most mind-bending, spectacular rises and falls in modern business history, the story of WeWork. It's an absolute wild ride, filled with obscene wealth, godlike delusions, and, well, dead unicorns. $47 billion. Just let that number sink in for a second. How on earth did a company that was literally burning through $3,000 every single minute manage to convince the smartest, most sophisticated investors in the room that it was worth $47 billion? It's a question that completely baffled Wall Street. And the answer? Well, it's basically a masterclass in psychology, aggressive salesmanship, and just pure, unadulterated hype. To actually understand this mystery, we really have to look at what their core hustle was. And honestly, it was shockingly simple. Strip away the aesthetics, and the business model was essentially a traditional, highly risky real estate subleasing gig. Step 1, you lease a building long-term from a landlord. Step 2, you carve that floor plane up into tiny little glass boxes. And Step 3, you rent those out on flexible, short-term contracts at a massive premium. Throw in some free craft beers, some neon signs, an arcade game, and call it a day. Now, here's the absolutely crucial point. WeWork's founder, Adam Neumann, wasn't naive. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew traditional real estate companies operated on super thin profit margins. They carry all this heavy overhead, long leases, maintenance, which means they only get valued at maybe 2 to 5 times their annual revenue. So Neumann masterminded this brilliant narrative to completely disguise WeWork. He realized if he could just convince the world that WeWork was actually a highly scalable software tech company, a company with infinite growth potential, they could demand those massive 20x multipliers that places like Google or Uber get. So Neumann didn't walk into venture capital meetings and say, "Hey guys, I want to be a landlord." Obviously not. Instead, he aggressively pitched them this vision of a revolutionary sharing economy platform. He literally looked them in the eye and called WeWork the world's first physical social network. He was basically pitching them the Uber for offices. And even though they had exactly zero proprietary software to back that up, Neumann completely mesmerized these investors with his shiny, disruptive tech veneer. And as private investors absolutely scrambled to not miss out on the next big tech unicorn, they fell right into a classic financial trap, the greater fool theory. Basically, they were blindly throwing money at WeWork, artificially pumping up its valuation sky high, crossing their fingers that they could eventually offload their wildly overvalued shares to an even greater fool once the company finally went public on the stock market. This whole hype train finally peaked in a moment that honestly changed financial history. Masayoshi's son, the head of SoftBank, and a guy infamous for making these massive, gut-feeling bets on charismatic founders, agreed to invest a staggering $4.4 billion into WeWork. And get this, he made that monumental, multi-billion-dollar decision after a meeting that lasted exactly 12 minutes. 12 minutes. I mean, it takes longer than that to order a pizza, and billions of dollars just traded hands. And right here is where things go from moving fast to getting dangerously reckless. Because instead of urging any kind of financial restraint, to protect his massive investment, Masa basically poured rocket fuel onto the fire. He infamously asked Neumann this question: who wins in a fight, the smart guy or the crazy guy? For Masa, the answer was obviously the crazy guy. So he actively pushed Neumann to take his already wild plans, make them 10 times bigger, and act even crazier. Well, the result of that advice was just catastrophic. Sure, WeWork's revenue was rapidly doubling year over year, which made the company look like an unstoppable juggernaut on paper. But, and this is a massive but, their totally reckless spending meant their losses were matching that growth step for step. They were actively bleeding cash, constantly needing massive new infusions of investor money just to keep the lights on for another month. Flush with this unprecedented mountain of venture capital, the hubris peaked. And it got absurd. WeWork started throwing millions of dollars at entirely unrelated side quests. They invested in a Spanish wave pool company. Why? Who knows? They bought Meetup.com. Neumann, the wife, Rebecca, launched WeGrow, which was this insanely expensive spiritual elementary school. They arbitrarily banned employees from eating meat to save the planet, all while Adam was flying around in a $63 million private jet he bought for himself. And all of this was happening against the backdrop of a super toxic, mandatory, alcohol-fueled party culture at the office. At this point, Neumann's ego had basically morphed into a full-blown messiah complex. He didn't just see himself as a CEO anymore. He legitimately thought he was the savior of humanity. During a mandatory company summer camp, he looked at his exhausted, underpaid staff and told them that their office leasing company was going to solve the global orphan crisis within 2 years. And then, well, from there, they'd simply move on to solve world hunger. I wish I was making that up. But reality always catches up, right? The ultimate unraveling started in 2019. A completely cash-strapped WeWork was finally forced to file an S-1 document. That's the mandatory legal paperwork you have to file to go public. Internally, they called this Project Wingspan. They desperately needed the cash from the public markets. But filing an S-1 meant they couldn't just hide behind Adam's charismatic storytelling anymore. They had to legally expose their actual financial books to the entire world. And the document was an absolute unmitigated disaster. It revealed that because their actual numbers were so horribly unprofitable, they had resorted to literally inventing entirely new financial metrics. They coined this ridiculous term called community-adjusted EBITDA. Essentially, it was a magic wand that allowed them to just scrub away massive, unsustainable costs like marketing and basic design expenses just to paint a completely fictional picture of success. Wall Street analysts read this and were totally stunned. But wait, it gets worse. Public scrutiny quickly uncovered some unbelievable conflicts of interest. The S-1 laid bare the brutal reality that they were losing $3,000 a minute. But it also showed that Adam Neumann had been privately buying buildings and then leasing them back to his own company. He was making millions acting as WeWork's personal landlord. Oh, and my absolute favorite detail, he legally trademarked the word we and actually charged his own company $5.9 million just for the right to use it. He was lining his own pockets while his core business bled to death. To make matters infinitely worse, Adam's wife, Rebecca, decided to treat this highly regulated, legally binding financial document like it was her own personal, spiritual manifesto. She insisted on adding these totally bizarre dedications, talking about the energy of we. Imagine handing that to serious Wall Street analysts who are just looking for responsible financial data, and instead they get a spiritual awakening. It completely alienated everyone. The public backlash was absolutely ruthless. Overnight, WeWork became the laughingstock of the financial world. The banks turned on them, the IPO had to be completely pulled in humiliation, and Adam was forced to step down in 2019. They made a last-ditch effort to go public later via a controversial SPAC listing in 2021, sort of a backdoor method to enter the markets. But it couldn't stop the inevitable. The company went into a spectacular downward spiral that finally ended in a massive bankruptcy in 2023. $47 billion of paper value, just totally wiped out. Yet, in what has to be the ultimate twist of unfairness, look at how the dust settled. To get Adam Neumann to quietly walk away from the company he literally broke, SoftBank negotiated an exit package that essentially made him a billionaire. Meanwhile, the thousands of young employees who actually believed in his mission, the people who worked insane overtime for below-market pay, were left completely devastated. Their stock options were instantly worthless, and thousands of them lost their jobs overnight. Which leaves us with this really provocative thought about the psychology of charismatic leadership. Because today, Adam Neumann has a brand new residential real estate startup called Flow. And before the company even launched its services, major venture capital firms threw hundreds of millions of dollars at it, instantly valuing it at over $1 billion. It really shows how susceptible we all are to a great story. But honestly, it forces us to ask, after everything that just happened with WeWork, who really is the greater fool here?